Canada worth visiting for amusement parks and roller coasters? That's the question we're going to be answering in this video. And for the short answer, no, but you're going to have to watch the whole video to find out why I came to that conclusion. So let's get started. So let's start off with the most obscure attraction I experienced on my Canadian trip, and that's Frankencoaster. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, this is a small kiddie coaster located on top of a Burger King in Niagara Falls, Canada. So the main reason anyone would want to experience this is just really for the credit and for the bragging rights, just because to say you rode a coaster on top of a Burger King is pretty crazy, even though this coaster really does suck. Frankencoaster is basically what you would get if you took a wild mouse, turned off all the brakes, and made it run with square wheels. And plus, on top of that, you get 2 laps. So, yes, it is as terrible as you might expect. Even though the ride is terrible, you at least get some good views of Niagara Falls from atop the ride. Just because, like, you're literally like a stone's throw away from Niagara Falls. So, that's the main pro of the attraction. And it's also not too expensive, as if I remember correctly, it was like $11 US per ride, which I think was like $15 Canadian, which I think equates to around like $11 US if I'm not mistaken. So overall, I don't recommend Frankencoaster at Niagara Falls, Canada. Unless you really want the credit and the bragging rights, then go ahead. But honestly, save your money elsewhere, and also you'll save your body from a lot of pain. So I honestly don't recommend Frankencoaster unless you just want the credit. So moving on to the first amusement park I experienced in Canada, that being the infamous La Ronde. If you're familiar with it, you've probably heard a lot of garbage about this place online, like on places like YouTube. And to be fair, I do feel like a lot of people are a little harsh on this park. Like, I don't think it's as bad as many people say. Not to say it's a good park, but it's definitely not as bad as a lot of people say. Because, like, one, it's in a beautiful location, being on an island in Montreal. The location is awesome, and you do have some good coasters as well, and it's affordable. But the main problems with this place is that the coaster lineup and just ride lineup in general is seriously unimpressive and underwhelming, because literally every ride here, other than Goliath, you can experience at another park. And honestly, that's why I didn't feel the need to spend a crazy amount of time here, just because pretty much every ride here I experienced somewhere else. And even Goliath, like, sure, it's a solid B&M mini hyper. It definitely is. But it's just nowhere near as good as the more traditional hypers. And I mean, I don't think that's necessarily a con per se, but because it's still a good, fun ride. But just temper your expectations. Like, it's not going to be as good as many of the other B&M hypercoasters. And plus, also, La Ronde is notorious for crazy long lines. Like, even just to enter the park, you're going to be waiting a long time. I will admit that, like, the lines do move faster than I was expecting, but the lines are still long nevertheless, and the reason why these lines are long isn't because the park is popular. It's not that. It's the fact that the operations at this park are freaking god awful. They're just terrible. Honestly, because of the long lines, another main issue with this park is line skipping. I didn't find line skipping to be that big of an issue, but I did experience it when I was in line for Le Vampire, the Batman clone at La Ronde. So that's just something you should know when visiting La Ronde. I personally don't recommend visiting this park. So moving on to Canada's best amusement park by far, and that's Canada's Wonderland. Now this park is overall pretty good, but it has some big flaws also. Overall, the pros with Canada's Wonderland is you definitely have the best coaster lineup at any Canadian amusement park. And that's not to say Canada's Wonderland's coaster lineup is like all that great, but it's definitely the best of any Canadian amusement park. And like with La Ronde, Canada's Wonderland is actually surprisingly affordable as well, as tickets regularly go on sale for pretty steep discounts. And then also another big benefit, Canada's Wonderland's water park is included with admission. And for someone like me who enjoys a good water park, I definitely took advantage of that. And Canada's Wonderland's water park, it doesn't have like a ton of great slides, but it does have some good stuff here and there. And then also the other main pro is that like Canada's Wonderland probably has the best flat ride collection in pretty much all of North America, at least that I'm aware of. Because Canada's Wonderland has some seriously crazy flat rides, and they're all great in their own ways. But I will admit, the one big issue with a lot of Canada's Wonderland's flat rides is that the seats on them and the restraints are extremely cramped. So just be aware that it might not be the most comfortable experience, but they are fun, nevertheless. And honestly, the main cons with Canada's Wonderland is like even though it does have the best coaster lineup in all of Canada, outside of the top four coasters, it heavily drops off. Like, for example, outside of Leviathan, Behemoth, Yukon Striker, and Vortex, which are all great, by the way, you have two awful wooden coasters in Mighty Canadian Mindbuster and Wild Beast. You have Flight Deck and Time Warp, which one's a terrible Zamperla Volare, and the other's a Vekoma SLC. And I've heard pretty terrible things about both. I didn't do either just because I didn't want to be in crazy pain. And plus, with Flight Deck, I didn't want to do another SLC because I did the SLC at La Ronde. And honestly, that wasn't terrible, but it could have been much better. But outside of that, you just have a bunch of other terrible rides as well. So like, even though Canada's Wonderland has a big coaster lineup, not a lot of them are good. But the ones that are good are really good, like Vortex, Leviathan, Behemoth, and Yukon Striker are all great. So Canada's Wonderland at least has some good stuff there. And then the other big con with Canada's Wonderland is it can get pretty darn crowded. Like, I got pretty lucky with the crowds at Canada's Wonderland. They weren't too bad for me. But I've heard that Canada's Wonderland can even get more crowded than something like Cedar Point. And Cedar Point's crowds are literally miserable. And the thing that stinks is that a lot of Canada's Wonderland's coasters, other than their top four, also don't have very high capacities as well. So then the lines are just going to get even longer on those crowded days. And personally, for my American viewers, I'd equate Canada's Wonderland very much so to like Carowinds in the sense that they both have a great top four, but then their coaster collection just drops right after that top four. So personally, from my experience, I definitely recommend Canada's Wonderland, but just remember that this park can get crowded. That's the one thing you should be aware of when visiting Canada's Wonderland.